Okay, y'all, we are in fact going to jump right into our next programming. I know folks are getting up, getting water, do what you need to do, but we are going to move right along because we have a lot to get through today. And we have three really amazing panelists joining us for this next session who have traveled both near and far. So I know this is back to back, but we are going to proceed. So this panel is on state and local policy, which we know is where we have a lot of opportunity in the next 4 years, more opportunity than usual. And so we wanted to bring in speakers today to really give a sense of what are the most promising campaigns happening at the state level right now that you could get plugged into, that your group could get plugged into. And as many of you already well know, we have a very robust state level presence as the climate and health movement. Can you raise your hand if you are involved with a state level group? Look at that. Yeah. And so there are a lot of folks here who are already there, who are already involved. And we also, if you're thinking about getting involved, we want to give a sense of what campaigns might be possible. Some of you are already actually working on campaigns that these folks will talk about today. But I think we also, from these conversations, are going to get insights on strategy and tactics that are working for these organizations that we can use in our work. We're going to hear how health professionals have been helpful to them or how they could have been helpful. And after this, we will go directly into lunch. And at lunch, you're invited to sit with folks from your state. And I'm hoping you'll meet new people, familiar faces, and maybe get to reflect on some of this after our lunch speaker. So I am going to start us off just by introducing each of our panelists, and then each of them will present on the campaign work they're doing, and then we will go into Q&A. So kind of you can put your questions in the CVent live question application whenever, but we'll get to them at the end. So who do we have on stage today? We have Cassidy DiPaola, who is the communications director at Fossil Free Media and helps lead the national Make Polluters Pay campaign. Who has heard of Make Polluters Pay? Okay, woo! And so that work focuses on holding the fossil fuel industry accountable for the role in the climate crisis and ensuring that it's the polluters, not our communities, that pay, which Cassidy will get into. Cassidy's also a 2L at New York Law School's Evening Division. So we're really grateful that Cassidy still joined us today. And next, we'll hear from Adah Crandall, who is an organizer with the Sunrise Movement based in DC, and her work focuses on training and mobilizing high school and college students across the country to stop the climate crisis and win a Green New Deal, and building towards mass student strikes in 2027 and 2028. And next, we have Courtney Brady will be our final speaker, and she is the Deputy Director for the Midwest region with Evergreen Action, focusing on advancing clean energy policies. And today we'll talk about defending the IRA and IIJA, and that's one of Evergreen's big focuses right now, as it is also for us, for our Hill Day, and supporting state-level climate action. So as you're listening to these, we're hoping that folks will, not only just learn about these campaigns and how to plug in, but take away the strategies and the tactics that we can apply to all of our work that we do. And just hopefully generating some new connections and new ideas for how we plug in and advance all of this great work. Because there's so much to be done state and locally, even as we persevere at the federal level. So I will pass it off to Cassidy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cassidy DiPaola, and as Bev mentioned, I'm the communications director at Fossil Free Media, and I also help to lead the National Make Polluters Pay campaign. I realize that in a room like this, I'm sort of preaching to the choir. All of you know about the urgency of climate action, and just by the show of hands, many of you are already a part of the Make Polluters Pay campaign. But for those of you who are not, who are new, welcome, and thank you so much for being here. I'm going to take a page out of Bev's book and ask for a show of hands. Who here has been impacted by a flood? I'll raise my hand. All right, what about a hurricane? I'll also raise my hand. How about extreme heat or extreme cold, perhaps a blizzard? I'm coming today from Brooklyn, so how many of us remember, for those of us from Chicago, from New York City, from DC, 2 summers ago when our air turned gray and turned orange from the smoke from Canada's wildfires? Lots more hands. And I also realized that many of you may be coming from Los Angeles, where so many of us just experienced the devastating fires this past January. I'm sure even more of us know friends, have loved ones that possibly lost their homes, lost their religious institutions, lost their schools, their playgrounds. The fact of the matter is that all of us are experiencing the climate crisis right here and right now. And we're paying the price. We're paying the price, obviously, with our health. We're paying the price with our homes, with our cultures, the memories that we have from these sacred places. And we're also paying the price literally with our wallets. Meanwhile, the fossil fuel industry continues to rake in record-breaking profits. It's really mind-blowing. And they haven't paid a dime for the damages that they've caused to our communities. And that's where the Make Polluters Pay campaign comes in. I should have had that slide up already. Big Oil wants us to think that they're invincible, and I can see why we would think that. After all, like I mentioned, they've got record profits, massive lobbying operations that small nonprofits could only dream of, and they've got tons of politicians in their pockets. We literally have fossil fuel CEOs in the White House running things within our energy and our climate and our environmental departments. So we're definitely not in a great spot. However, I promise you, the truth is they're on the defensive. They've spent hundreds of millions of dollars fighting against climate lawsuits. They're desperately lobbying against climate superfund bills, which I'll share more about. Some of you may have seen just this week, the American Energy Institute launched a website going through 200 years of small mentions of climate change in the news. And they say, everybody knew about it. So it's not our fault that nothing happened. It's not our fault. I encourage you to look at the website, 200yearsofclimatedebates.com. It's kind of nuts. But the thing is, take a look at what's happening across the country. In Honolulu, some of you may be coming from Hawaii, oil companies like Sunoco and Shell have spent millions of dollars on high-profile attorneys petitioning all the way up to the Supreme Court to get their case dismissed, and they failed. In California, last session alone, Chevron and the Western States Petroleum Association spent $30 million lobbying against just the climate superfund bill. And before we even reintroduced the bill this session, which we just did last week, and we're very excited about, they were already spending millions of dollars on ad campaigns. This is not something an industry would do if they're not scared. They're genuinely threatened by us. They know that people are waking up. We're all here today. They know we're here gathering, and they're scared. And we know that the best defense is good offense. And so the Make Polluters Pay campaign is very simple. The fossil fuel industry created this crisis. They spent decades lying about it, and they actively misled the public to protect their profits. Now, we think that they should pay for the damages. So the campaign is basically focused on 2 prongs. The first, which I'll be able to share more about today, is legislation. So this is passing state and federal level climate superfund bills that will hold big oil financially accountable. So this means creating a very clear legal framework for assessing damages and creating funds that can be then used to create resiliency and just transition programs. And then the second, slightly more complicated, is our litigation efforts. And so this means that we're taking fossil fuel industries to court for their climate crimes. These lawsuits are based on well-documented proof that many of you have seen that the fossil fuel industry has known since the 1950s or earlier about what burning fossil fuels would do to our world, and they lied. And so right now, as you can see, both strategies are building major momentum. Over 35 states and municipalities have introduced climate lawsuits. I have right here 5 states have introduced legislation, but Tennessee just introduced legislation after I wrote this, which is incredibly exciting and kind of surprising. So we can do it in red states too. This is nonpartisan. And New York and my state of Vermont, or my state of New York and Vermont, have already passed climate superfund bills. And we're hoping that California is going to be soon behind. We know this can work because it already has. As healthcare professionals, you know that Big Tobacco was forced to pay over $200 billion for lying about the harms that smoking causes. And we're also seeing that opioid manufacturers are now being forced to pay billions of dollars for fueling an addiction crisis. This can work, and we think it's time that it works for big oil. So one of the most powerful tools that we have is a climate superfund. This is really not a new idea. It's modeled after the 1980 Superfund law, which makes polluters pay to clean up hazardous and toxic waste sites. It's the largest environmental remediation program in US history, and it operates on a very simple principle. If you caused the damage, you have to pay to clean it up. So we think it works for toxic waste sites, and it should work for the climate crisis. It's just a little bit more complicated. So the Climate Superfund basically takes on the same polluters pay principle, and it applies it to climate damages. I'm not a lawyer yet. I'm not an economist, and I'm not a scientist. So bear with me as I try to simplify this just a bit. But basically, using attribution science and working with economists, states are able to calculate the cost of climate damages, things like floods, hurricanes, wildfires. They then are able to pinpoint the major polluters in each state, and this is companies that are responsible for over 1 billion tons of CO2 emissions. And they take this percentage and make each company, they basically send an invoice to each company for their percentage of this damage. That money is then put into a state fund where the state, working with frontline communities, working with nonprofits like ours, determine the right ways to implement this into our state. We really think that this creates a very direct connection between those who caused the harm and the solutions to not fix it. Nothing can come close to the damages that we've experienced, but to at least start making a change. And you know, as I mentioned, I'm coming from Brooklyn, New York. So in practice, what this Superfund bill could mean is financing projects like coastal barriers in the Queens or in Bronx. It could mean flood resilient infrastructure in Staten Island. And it could mean really crucial cooling centers in heat vulnerable communities like mine in Brooklyn. And by following the Superfund model, we're ensuring that the biggest climate offenders finally take financial responsibility instead of taxpayers like you and I paying for 100% of the cost. So I just want to reiterate this point of who is going to pay. It's not small businesses. You will not be seeing small businesses on this list. It's not utilities companies, though we need to make them pay too. It's a different campaign. And it's not everyday consumers. It's the biggest polluters. Every climate fund bill focuses on the top fossil fuel giants. This is companies, again, with over 1 billion tons of CO2 emissions. That's massive. According to the Carbon Majors database, only 20 companies are responsible for more than a third of the carbon emissions since 1965. These companies are like Shell, Exxon, BP. These companies have the most significant historical emissions, and they also have the largest resources. They should pay, they can pay, and they will pay. One thing I should note is that each state does it slightly differently. So my state of New York, we've decided to just put a number on it from the outset. $75 billion over 25 years, factoring out to about $3 billion a year. Other states like California are doing it differently, where they're passing the legislation, then they will do a full cost assessment to determine what the fees shall be. I think there's pros and cons in New York because we chose a more conservative number of $75 billion. We're much more likely to get the money fast. We already did the math. However, in California, it's going to take a little bit longer for the math to be done and the science to be done, but they'll likely get a much larger number because what they've done to our planet is sort of incredible. Either way, the message is the same, though. Polluters should cover the cost of climate disasters, not taxpayers. Now we've been talking about money so much. Where's the money going to go? We think of it when we're talking to lawmakers about the policy. We kind of put it into 4 different buckets of work. The first is strengthening infrastructure, so rebuilding bridges, roads, and power grids to withstand extreme weather. I was able to yesterday walk around Georgetown, and I saw this sign for permeable pavement, and I was so excited, took a picture. But basically, this pavement is able to absorb water much better than normal pavement. And so when there's flooding, it's able to absorb all of this water. It's not going into our basements, and we're not left paying for it. The second bucket is for actually preventing disasters. So this is funding wildfire prevention, funding seawall construction, flood defenses, evacuation routes. And a place like Miami, where literally whole neighborhoods are at risk of going underwater, things like seawalls and elevated roads could save billions of dollars, and it could save hundreds, if not thousands, of lives. The third is really about how to help pay for communities to rebuild. This could look like covering the cost of housing, public health services, emergency response. For my Californians in the room, we saw that it cost $15 billion for Paradise to be rebuilt, and the Paradise fires basically wiped out the community in 2018. This is $15 billion that most communities don't have, and they're having to take this money from our school system, from our healthcare system, from other climate clean energy programs that we were excited about, now are being grabbed to put towards rebuilding. And then lastly is towards supporting communities and workers. So America, the current clean energy sector already employs about 3 million Americans, just over 3 million. And with proper funding like that from a climate super fund, we could create millions more good paying jobs, especially in frontline communities. This is not, despite what they say, this is not just about punishing polluters. It's about ensuring that communities can recover and can rebuild. So as I mentioned, Make Polluters Pay is a 2-pronged approach. I could spend 16 days talking about this. I have 10 minutes. So all I will say is that these lawsuits, like ExxonMobil being sued by California, they are just as critical as climate superfund bills. And they're parallel but complementary strategies. So Superfund laws create a fund to deal with the climate damages. It's a way to get money fast without having to go through lengthy battles in court for every single disaster that we face. It's incredibly important. On the other side, these lawsuits hold companies accountable for decades of lies and misinformation. It's a way for community members to get justice. It's also a way to revoke the fossil fuel industry's social license to operate when they're being convicted or found guilty every time they're found liable. And so, a quick example is our lawsuit, Minnesota's lawsuit against ExxonMobil, Koch Industries, and API. They are specifically, there's a variety of different lawsuits, but this lawsuit is specifically targeting disinformation, which in turn delayed climate action. These are legal theories very similar to the successful legal theories of big tobacco. We have all the evidence, and we feel like our cases are really strong. If you're interested in learning more, let's talk later about lawsuits. And I think that the most important part of the Make Polluters Pay campaign is the fact that it's about fairness. For decades, low-income communities and communities of color have faced really the brunt of not only pollution, but of extreme weather disasters, all while fossil fuel industries profit and while white communities and wealthy communities are really able to avoid much of this impact. For example, in Houston, Texas, where some of our Make Polluters Pay campaigners are, predominantly Black and Latino communities in places like Manchester, Texas, have cancer rates as high as 22% or as much as 22% higher than the city average due to refineries and chemical facilities. On top of this pollution that they're already experiencing, when Hurricane Harvey hit, it was these communities who faced the worst flooding, but received the least recovery assistance. So climate superfund laws aim to correct that injustice. Every law has written into it that at least 35%, 35% is the lowest, most states are closer to 45%, of the funding raised goes to frontline communities. Obviously, the hope is that all of our funding is going to frontline communities, but we're ensuring that at least 35% is specifically dedicated to them. This means investing in resilience and clean energy and real solutions. It also means working with these frontline communities as we're creating this legislation to ensure that the programs we're trying to implement are ones that are actually helpful, productive, and important to those communities. So this could mean in practice, funding community-owned solar in the Bronx. It could mean flood protection in coastal Louisiana. It could also mean urban forestry in heat-vulnerable areas like Phoenix. Make Polluters Pay is a transformative policy. It's not just for climate action, but it's about climate justice. And I know that we have healthcare professionals in the room. You all like data, maybe more than I do, but I wanted to give you some. The big picture is this is incredibly popular. The Make Polluters Pay campaign is incredibly popular. It's one of our best tools. 70% of Americans want the fossil fuel industry to pay for climate damages. This includes majorities across political parties, and 66% of likely voters, including 89% of Democrats, specifically support a climate superfund law. And when voters understand that these funds will go towards disaster preparedness and disaster response, support increases further. I have a lot more polling, but I have a few minutes. My last will just be that 63% of voters said that they would rather support a candidate who will introduce a climate superfund bill than one that won't. This is seen across the political spectrum as common sense and as overwhelmingly fair. The very first Superfund bill that we passed was passed under a Republican governor. It was Vermont, but they're still Republicans. It's a winning issue politically, morally, and practically. And we introduced one in Tennessee, so not just Republican Vermonters. And it's time to take action. So speaking of taking action, this is where all of you come in. As healthcare professionals, your voices are trusted. When you speak up, policymakers listen. We were just laughing in the back about how we're always on the phone with members of Congress or with state and local reps being like, you got to introduce this bill, man. I promise it's the best. And we're like, can I just talk to a professional? Can I talk to a healthcare professional? Can I talk to a lawyer? Can I talk to an economist? Fortunately, we have tons in the room. And we need you to use your influence. Get connected in this campaign. Reach out to lawmakers if you have those relationships. And if you don't, reach out to us and we can help you form those relationships. Write with authority. I can't tell you how many ed boards are looking for physicians, nurses being faced with rising numbers of folks coming to hospitals because of heat stroke. And they want to hear from you and why we need to implement these Superfund bills or why polluters should pay. So, your voices really can make a difference. I won't tell you what to do, but I really do think you should become a part of this campaign. And bring data. I was on Thursday, Rhode Island had its very first hearing on their new climate superfund bill, and we were racing to find a healthcare professional that could come to the hearing to talk about why this work matters. We had economists, we had attorneys, we had obviously plenty of environmental advocates, but we couldn't find a healthcare professional. And that's where all of you will come in. I see you waving your hand. Thank you. Yes, we'll talk. So please join us. Thank you so much for allowing me to share this campaign with all of you. Thank you for being a part of it if you are already. We're building a national movement to make polluters pay. We want you to join us. If you're interested in learning more, you could visit our website, just polluterspay.net, or email me at cassidy@fossilfree.media. I'll email it to Bev. We have resources, we have toolkits, we have connections to local campaigns in every single state. We can help you draft op-eds, we can help you connect to local electeds, and help you join forces with frontline communities that have been doing this work for far longer than we have. The climate crisis didn't happen by accident. It was the result of powerful choices made by powerful companies that put profit over the planet and over our health. Now it's time to make these companies pay for the harm that they've caused. So thank you so much. And I can't wait to see you all as part of our campaign.
Thank you so much, Cassidy. And now we're going to hear from Adah from Sunrise. Thank you all for submitting your questions on CVent. If you haven't been, feel free to do so. I'm loving seeing which questions are being upvoted. Although I see y'all are upvoting Lisa Patel's, and I think, you shouldn't really don't suck up like that. Like, it's okay. But yeah, this is great. And we'll get to these after we hear from our speakers.
Hey everyone, my name is Adah Crandall. I'm 18 years old and I'm an organizer with the Sunrise Movement. I graduated high school early and essentially dropped out of college to do this work because I believe that the climate crisis is the fight of my generation, and I am all in on figuring out how we're going to stop this. I've been organizing for climate action in my community and statewide and nationally since I was 12 years old. I went to Harriet Tubman Middle School in North Portland, Oregon, and I learned from my social studies teacher that the State Department of Transportation was trying to expand a toxic, polluting freeway into our school. And that was sort of the first thing that illuminated for me the impacts of the climate crisis on our health and also the disproportionate impact on low-income communities and communities of color, because I knew that it wasn't a coincidence that this highway was being expanded into my school where most of my classmates were Black and brown students. And since then, I've worked on a number of campaigns. I've mobilized students in Portland for mass climate strikes. I've campaigned for local and state policy. And I found myself here now because a couple of years ago, an organizer at Sunrise came to me about this policy called the Green New Deal for schools. And it was a bill, a federal bill, that was being introduced by Representative Bowman, which would basically put billions of dollars into public schools across the country to transform them to face the climate crisis. And it would make sure that all students had access to a safe and healthy education, no matter their zip code, no matter the color of their skin. We knew that schools were critical parts of our communities and that investing in them meant investing in our lives and our futures. And so while this was a federal bill, it was also a resolution that could be won at a local level. And it was demanding 5 main things. The first was safe and clean buildings. So this would mean making sure that When students go to school, there's not lead in our water. I remember for a couple of years in elementary school, we couldn't use the water fountains at all. And we'd have to like drink out of these little cone-shaped, the little cone-shaped paper cups that always get soggy and they leak everywhere. I had that for a couple of years because they discovered lead in our water. Still waiting to see if that's going to do anything to our health because we were drinking it for years. Making sure that we electrify our school buses, things like that. This demand, I think, is a little bit less related to like people's overall experience going to school. But I think it's important to name that school districts are often some of the largest owners of like buildings and buses and infrastructure in a lot of cities. And so decarbonizing those facilities has a pretty big impact on our ability to decarbonize society as a whole. And it also makes sure that when kids go to school, they can breathe clean air and have sinks in their bathrooms that work. I organized with some students in Detroit for a little while that said, Adah, like, how are we supposed to campaign for climate curriculum and all of these other things? Because 2 out of 3 of the bathrooms in our building don't have running water. There are rats in our classrooms. There are very basic low-level things that we need to fix to treat our students with dignity and make sure that people have a place to learn. The second demand is free and healthy lunches. This is pretty self-explanatory. Kids can't get through the day if we don't have good food to eat that will fuel us. For a lot of my classmates in middle and high school, and a lot of the students that I work with, school is a place that you can go to know that you will have a meal to eat when you don't have food at home. And so that is really, really important. The next is climate curriculum. How many of y'all were taught in school that you needed to recycle and reduce your carbon footprint to stop the climate crisis? Yeah. We need education that actually calls out the fossil fuel industry and its impacts, that teaches students the truth that we as individuals are not the ones fueling this crisis, but it is big oil. It is huge corporations that want to put their profit over our lives. And if we don't teach our students the truth about that in our classrooms where people are forming their values and worldview, we won't be able to organize in the way that we need. The next is pathways to green jobs. We want to make sure that students graduating high school have the skills that they need to go into green union jobs fighting the climate crisis, instead of recruiting students to the military or jobs that won't pay enough and won't serve them well in their lives. We want to make sure that people are actually set up to succeed in the future in the world that we're building. And finally, climate disaster plans, making sure that when disasters hit, when there are hurricanes and wildfires and floods, our schools are a place where our communities can find safety and get resources, have schools hand out masks, be cooling shelters when there's heat waves, things like that, that I know would have been enormously impactful in my community in Oregon, where we faced major wildfires for several years. And I want to talk a little bit more about why schools specifically. I think sometimes the connection between schools and climate isn't always clear. But when we talk about the climate crisis, we know that we need to transform every level of our society. And schools are a really critical place to start, right? Because no matter who we are, every one of us will or has interacted with schools in our community at some point. A lot of the time, they are cornerstone institutions within communities, and they're also where the next generation of minds are being formed. So we at Sunrise really believe that if we can remake our schools to stop the climate crisis and guarantee all students a good education that sets them up to succeed in a climate-changed future, we can lead the way for the rest of society. And we can show our communities with the Green New Deal for schools what a Green New Deal could look like for our world as a whole. And so in the fall of 2023, we launched over 30 student campaigns around the country for local Green New Deal for schools resolutions that would eventually build power for national legislation. Students in Boulder, Colorado won their resolution, giving school board testimony every single week. Students wrote op-eds. I supported a student in Bozeman, Montana to actually run for school board herself after the school board ignored their demands. We've had students run trainings, have walkouts, organize with their teachers' unions, and they have really relentlessly campaigned to win these demands. And this power is only continuing to grow because a lot of these schools that have started running campaigns, they've gone and they've seeded student groups at other schools in their district to keep building power and to increase the number of students that are demanding this from their school boards. And so far, 5 districts have won a Green New Deal for schools, have won all these demands: climate curriculum, free lunches, climate disaster plans. And there are many more on the way. And I want to be clear that these would not have happened without real commitment from young people and from teachers and community members who campaigned hard and made this happen. Now, how many of y'all think we're going to stop the climate crisis by passing a few local resolutions with our school boards? Yeah, probably not, which is why this local campaigning isn't where we stop, right? Local campaigning is a tool to build power and build a base and train up our organizers and start to show the vision of what a Green New Deal could look like. But ultimately, we need to build a mass movement that spans the entire country. And the good news is that young people, high school and college students, have always been at the forefront of the fight for a better world. From the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the Civil Rights Movement, to March for Our Lives organizers, to the encampments that we saw pop up on college campuses for Palestine last spring. Young people almost always light the spark that the rest of society can follow in creating societal change. And so because of that, our schools are some of the most powerful leverage that we have. Because when we think about organizing, it's often helpful to think about pre-existing structures in our communities that we can organize in. And if you organize and you're just trying to say, okay, let's get all of the people that care about climate, come one, come all, any people from wherever, and we'll bring them all to DC to do a march, you're not actually going to reach a supermajority of people in society. You're going to get the pre-selecting people that already care about the issue. But when you're organizing in a structure like a school or a workplace, you're actually forced to have those hard conversations and bring people into the movement. And students have a lot of power in society, right? Because society's ability to continue functioning, to continue having people go into the workforce and carry out these jobs, that depends on students' complicity, that depends on students being willing to continue going to school and continuing business as usual. And so if students stop complying, these systems in society that fuel the climate crisis start to break. And that's why we're organizing in our schools. And I talked a little bit about schools and workplaces because this is all part of a bigger vision. How many of you have heard of the general strike in 2028 called for by the UAW? Okay, a few people. We're going to get that number up by 2028. Basically, UAW has called for other unions to all align their contracts for a 2028 general strike. This would mean mass disruption at every level of society that actually shuts things down and forces the government to concede to our demands. Because we can pass as many school district resolutions and state bills as we want, but ultimately we need society-wide disruption at a scale that we have not seen before. Because the climate crisis is at a scale that we haven't seen before. And so the urgency and the scale of our response needs to fit that. And so right now in 2025, we are building our base. We're training people, running local campaigns to bring more students in. In 2026 and 2027, we will launch mass student strikes. And I'm not talking like 2019 Greta Thunberg, you skip school for one Friday and then go back. That was great. There was a moment for that. I organized them in Portland. But with this, we want to cause actual sustained disruption. So this is students working with their teachers' unions to actually shut down schools for multiple days at a time until our demands to take action against the climate crisis are met. These student strikes in 2026 and 2027 will inspire society, light the spark for a general strike in 2028, where we'll have a new presidential election and we will have the opportunity to define the next political era of this country. And I know that sounds crazy and big, right? And you're probably looking at this plan and you're like, this isn't really a plan. This is a list of bullet points. Yeah. But also for people like me who are teenagers growing up into this society, this is the best plan that we have because nobody else has actually put forward a plan that meets the scale and the urgency of the climate crisis. And so can I promise you that this is going to work? No. It's very unlikely, honestly, that this won't work. And also, it is the best plan that we have, and it is the best shot that we have at tackling this huge crisis. And I am willing to put everything I have into giving that a shot. Now, I want to be clear that when I say young people have always led social movements, that does not take older generations off the hook, right? I cannot count the number of times that adults have come up to me after things like this and said, oh my goodness, you're so inspiring. Like, your generation is going to save us. Trust me, we are trying our best, but we cannot save us alone. And so there are a lot of ways that adults can support these student movements, whether that is organizing your union, starting a union if you don't have one yet, connecting with parents and teachers, talking to them about schools and the climate crisis, and talking to any other young people in your life and activating them, telling them to join the movement and help be connectors to get them involved in those spaces. I don't have my contact information and whatnot on here, but I hopefully it will get sent out in a follow-up. Yeah, I again want to say that this is a really big vision and it can feel abstract. And also, in order to stop the climate crisis, we are going to need to let ourselves be brave and let ourselves have a little bit of hope that maybe this can work. Because when people throughout history have come together, we have radically transformed society, and we can do it again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adah, for sharing that vision and sharing all of the work y'all are doing and how you're building and how we're going to get there. And now our last speaker is Courtney from Evergreen Action to talk a little bit about what we will be talking about on Tuesday when we go to the Hill.
Thank you so much, Bev, Adah, and Cassidy. That was excellent. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening federally, which we're all collectively sighing right now. It is the word of the month is chaos. I heard that a bunch of you are going to the Hill on Tuesday. So I just want to express how important that is and give a little bit of like an appetizer of what's happening in the moment and kind of the political shift we're seeing that I think we can like really take advantage of right now to defend like billions of dollars that are coming into our communities for climate and clean energy. So I'm just going to hop right in. I'm sure most folks in this room are familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, which collectively are funding billions of dollars in climate mitigation efforts and the future of clean energy in the United States. We've never seen any investment this large globally into climate mitigation, and it absolutely has to be protected. We are in a moment where if the US cannot catch up with countries that are already working on this and have been for decades, we will get left behind. And what that's going to do is leave hundreds of thousands of jobs on the table. Public health impacts will be broad and sweeping because of the growing climate crisis. And this is just really a moment where there is a lot of hostility on the federal level, but there's really an opportunity for all of us to intervene, especially people that are not big green climate organizations. The credibility of health voices, the credibility of business voices right now has never, ever been more important, in my opinion. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about two things that are happening federally with federal funding right now. One is in the executive branch and one is in the legislative branch. So I'm sure most folks are aware, but about a month after President Trump took to his second term, he basically put out a memo that said all federal funds going into states are frozen. We've never seen anything done like this in American history. It's also illegal. A little schoolhouse rock right now is that Congress appropriates funds, they vote on it, and that money is approved by democracy. The president cannot come in and say everything that's already been appropriated now cannot get to the states, but that's what he's done. What we immediately saw after that was, I think, 30 plus now states have sued the Trump administration for this, their attempt to do this. And a judge has filed like a restraining order that prevents the Trump administration from actually freezing already appropriated funds. They're choosing to not comply with the law fully right now. So this is really an opportunity where we need to be demanding our congressional members to put pressure on the Trump administration to release these funds. I will get into some critical deadline moments, but the next 2 months have never been more important for our voice to be heard on the unpopularity and the sheer danger to our democracy of the president doing this. Oh, and I should mention that some of the funds have been unfrozen at this point, and some are directly still under attack. A lot of USDA specific programs, clean energy financing, which is really the money that's going as directly as possible to communities to finance home repairs and energy efficiency to lower energy costs, are the funds that they're directly attacking. Anything that they see as an effort to improve environmental justice, anything that relates to helping low income and communities of color, this administration has just prioritized that as public enemy number one, which just goes to show that whatever they campaigned on around lowering costs and prioritizing communities that have been left behind is the antithesis of what is happening in the government right now. And I should just say, my work is specifically engaging with states and governor administrations in states. And even though there is some federal funding that has been unfrozen now, these states are terrified. They do not want to release these funds because they think they will be direct targets of this administration's hostility. And all that's doing right now is just slowing down the implementation of all of these programs. And that is partly what they are trying to do. They are creating this fear environment. So that is threat one. And then we move over to Congress, where the Republicans have both control of both chambers. And they have come in with what they feel like is a mandate to basically repeal everything that the Biden administration had done. Not true, but they are trying to repeal essentially every single thing that exists in the Inflation Reduction Act in their upcoming budget process. So I'm going to get into the end, talk about a few timelines that really matter here. But we know that the House resolution that just passed, so basically the blueprint of what Congress wants to do with their budget, is a zero out of all of the Inflation Reduction Act programs. And that is what President Trump has given them the directive to do. And I will talk a little bit about kind of how we can make an impact here, since they do have control of the full government. We're starting to see Republicans really take heat for this. People are showing up to their town halls talking about things like healthcare and veterans benefits and clean energy investments coming into their communities. We're seeing now town halls, we're seeing members literally run out of town halls because they're so afraid of this backlash. And we're seeing some Republicans in the media that are saying, wait, let's slow down a little. Our community is telling us these things are really important. And they're creating a lot of jobs, objectively. So maybe this isn't the best thing for us to repeal. So I think it's hard to talk to Republicans about climate change, that's for sure, especially federally. I don't think that's true of the full Republican Party, but definitely their representatives. I think that we need to move past that in this moment. We have to talk to Republicans. We have to show them that what Elon Musk is doing to our government is not what people voted for. People want jobs. They want lower energy costs. That is what the Inflation Reduction Act is doing, and we need them to protect the investments that are coming down. Okay, what's at stake? I think for the sake of talking to Congress on Tuesday, I would emphasize three things. You are all health professionals, so public health is clearly the most credible message you are going to give. The longer we delay this inevitable transition to clean energy, the more we increase our reliance on an outdated pollutive fossil fuel system that the world is moving away from and America will get left behind. Republicans want to hear about global competitiveness. So talking about the US getting left behind is very critical in this moment. Talk about the impacts you're seeing in your communities with your patients. They want to understand kind of this Green New Deal scam or whatever they're calling it is actually creating jobs and helping health improvements in your community. Tell those stories, talk about your clients. I'm going to highlight one of the amazing organizations who I just saw in the room who's already doing this, and talk about energy costs. President Trump ran on a platform to lower energy costs and gas prices. Everything they are doing to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act is going to do the reverse of that. Talk about the impact of higher energy costs on your patients in the areas you're working in, and talk about the lost job opportunities. I think health, costs, jobs. Those things will resonate across political lines. Okay, I'm quickly going to get into what's going on in Congress with the budget right now. So I think on Tuesday, if I know you're going to get a training, but if I had to demand 2 asks of Congress right now, it's demanding them to pressure the Trump administration to release funds that have been illegally frozen and keep the staff who are implementing these critical programs. On top of the federal funding slashing we're seeing across the board, we're also seeing fear tactics lodged against the people working in our federal agencies. Public servants are getting fired for carrying out things like veterans health care. Tell your representative that and tell them to demand keeping these jobs and releasing the already legally appropriated funds, and then defend the IRA and the tax credits that are coming down. I'm going to flag at the end, but Evergreen Action is launching a toolkit actually tomorrow, which basically runs through the entire budget process, how to contact your members of Congress, who they are, what committees they sit on, and kind of the tactics and like templates that you can actually use when talking to them. Your state's delegation, so the people who represent you in Congress and in the Senate, may not be on the appropriations committees. That's the committees that's actually going to make the decision of what passes in the budget, but they certainly can get through to them. So talking to your federal delegation as often, as frequently as in numbers as possible is going to be critical for the next 2 months. Congress has set themselves an Easter deadline. It's unclear whether they'll meet that by the end of April, but they want to get their budget done by then, which means we have about 2 months to tell the Republicans that these investments are popular and people want them. Okay, so everyone already spoke about this, but health professionals are absolutely critical in this fight. Your voice transcends political lines. You have credibility in your community and you really understand the direct stakes of what's happening with pollution, climate disasters, and the benefits of clean energy. Every poll that has ever been commissioned on what resonates with voters in terms of climate mitigation and support for investments and funding specifically, public health is always 1 or 2 on that list. So you all have the most credibility, obviously, in talking about health impacts. I want to highlight a case study of folks who are in the room. If you're a part of Healthy Climate Wisconsin, hello, and just know I'm a big admirer of your work. So when the Inflation Reduction Act passed, there was billions of dollars that were on the table for rural electric cooperatives, which provide electricity to rural underserved areas, for them to apply to basically transition to add renewable energy to their resource mix. Climate groups have tried advocating to organizations in rural areas and cooperatives and companies before, and it's very hard to get a seat at the table in those spaces. Health professionals have proven that they can and that they care what you're saying. Healthy Climate Wisconsin advocated for Dairyland Cooperative, which is a massive Midwest electricity cooperative that provides to a bunch of rural areas, to apply for this funding and transition a lot of their energy mix to renewables, and they got over $500 million because of that advocacy. The projected funding is going to power 800,000 homes and is projected to lower energy costs by 42%. I can honestly say if the health professionals were not involved in that application process and the advocacy to their rural cooperative to apply for that funding, that never would have happened. So congrats to Healthy Climate Wisconsin. And although this was like an application for funding, which is now potentially at risk, that's, I think, really emphasizes the point that like your work on defense is going to be absolutely critical. If it was heard for applications of funding, it's certainly going to be heard in protecting that funding itself. And I'm going to quickly run through, which I know everyone's already doing Tuesday, but talk to your lawmakers as often as possible. Again, we're going to share this toolkit, which gives a good overview of kind of who the power players are right now in Congress and who's going to make the decisions. Request meetings with them. You're going in DC. You can do this virtually. And one of the best tactics I think that we've seen work at the state level is taking them on site visits. So invite them to your clinic, invite them to a clean energy project, invite them to a coal plant in your community, and talk to them about health impacts. That, I think that is the most effective way to get a member of Congress to understand what's at stake here. And please, please talk to the media to the extent you can. Lawmakers, they're kind of vain. They care a lot about how they're covered in the media. Tell them, or show in the media that like they're putting their credibility at risk by potentially repealing all of these health benefiting, job sustaining investments. And really lead with the personal. Talk about your patients, talk about your community impacts. And then I will just flag a couple resources. So our toolkit launching tomorrow, I'm going to plug it one more time. We're actually doing a webinar on it tomorrow, which I know folks are going to be here, but we will share around a recording of it, which walks through basically how to utilize the whole toolkit. And then I just want to note that March 14th is the funding deadline for Congress to basically pay the government's bills for this year. That is different than this long-term reconciliation process for like the Trump administration's budget. But the Democrats in particular can really use March 14th to really cause a racket about the funding that's frozen right now and use that moment to push Republicans to release that federal funding before they negotiate on any budget at all. So you all could not be going to these offices at a more important time. Tell them, use that March 14th moment to get those funds released and really talk to them about the long-term budget implications as well. I can share out a bunch of these, but there's just so many organizations that are tracking the actual dollar-to-dollar investments that are coming into communities. You can just look up your state at this point, and every single state is seeing billions of dollars come down. Would largely advocate that you look at those before you go to these offices just to really know what's at stake. I just want to emphasize that as a person working on states work, I'm working a lot on advancing progressive state policies in the places where it's possible. It's probably one of the most important things we can be doing. But for the next 2 months, we need state voices and local voices involved in this federal fight. If we lose now, the next 4 years are going to be a lot harder to weather. So I will just say that and make a plug for just really talk to your members of Congress regardless of party. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Courtney, for laying all of that out. When we first contacted Courtney, we didn't have a clear idea of what our Hill Day programming was going to be, and now we do. And you will also learn a lot more about that from ALA, who will give us some similar training before we go and do the Hill Day on Tuesday. So we are running a little short on time, but we do have some really great questions here, and I want to squeeze in a couple of them. So this one has the most upvotes, which is for Cassidy, and it's how do you know that companies will not pass the costs to the consumer within the Make Polluters Pay? No, it's this panel. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Is this working?
Is it on?
Yes. Okay, perfect. What a wonderful question. That happens to be the number one talking point of our opposition. So bear with me when I try to explain this, but I will first say that we've had the pleasure of working with Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz. He's a professor at Columbia University. He's absolutely brilliant. And he has told us time and time again, we have a great YouTube video that I'll plug too, if you go to Make Polluters Pay on YouTube, that one, it's illegal for them to put this cost on consumers because this is a past cost and they're unable to, he says it in better terms than I can, but basically they have funding for past costs and they can't take it out of their current profit. Second of all, the price of oil and the price of gas is set on a global market. So when a specific state, a small state like Vermont, or even a large state like New York, passes a climate superfund bill, it's impossible for an oil company to be able to say, well, now I'm going to change the price of a barrel of oil in my specific state when these are set on the global scale. In addition, if a few different, there is market competition, right? So if a state is going to, or excuse me, if a company is going to raise their price of energy, someone else is going to come along and say, hi, I'm actually going to provide this at a lower rate. And they don't want to run this risk. And I'm really not doing justice to this question the way that I think a lot of our experts can. But this is something we face constantly. And we're trying our hardest to say that this is not true. I think that, you know, the fossil fuel industry has done bad things to us forever, and they've done illegal things to us. And they're going to find a way to try their hardest to put this cost back onto us. If we don't even want to talk about it in terms of the economics, we can just say this. We're already paying for 100% of climate disasters. My high taxes, when I used to live in a basement apartment in Brooklyn. When that flooded, I had to pay my friends to come and clean it up. And so there is no buffer for us right now. And so that's the easiest way to explain it, is that they're going to try their best to put this cost upon us. This is a way to stop it just a bit. Also, economists, Nobel laureates are saying that this is not possible due to market competition and the fact that the price of oil is set on a global market as well. But we have a bunch of economists' letters. We had a brilliant California economist just write a letter to Governor Newsom saying that this won't affect consumer prices. And we have a lot of different resources that I'll share. And we have a whole toolkit that answers every single question a person could possibly have. So I really appreciate that question. I need to, as a advocate for this campaign, get better at answering it. But it's a valid concern, and a lot of experts are saying that it's something that we shouldn't not be worried about, but that technically isn't supposed to happen.
Thank you so much for answering an econ question. I wonder if this one also got a lot of votes. I'm wondering if you could just answer, which is about the health costs, and if the health costs are calculated in that damage. I know it varies bill to bill, like,
Yes.
and I know there are folks in this audience and online who are actually working on this. Yay. But if you want to speak to that really quick.
Yeah, that's another excellent question. So the short answer is yes. It is different state to state, but majority of these bills factor into the overall $75 billion in New York and the overall fee. So I'll stop there because I'm not a health professional, but yes, they are being factored in. I do think it's a more difficult process, but they are being factored in. And I'll also just really plug that it's the health professionals that have helped us get this bill passed in places like Vermont, in places like New York. We had some physicians talking, as I mentioned, about just how many people are coming to hospitals in New York from heat stroke. And paired with that is the fact that we don't have enough energy to fuel all of the air conditioners, which are then causing climate change more. And it's this additive process. But they are being factored in. And if you feel like you're an expert that could help us and help lawmakers as they make these bills better understand the cost of health impacts from the climate crisis, please reach out. We always encourage folks to get involved.
Yes, thank you so much. And I will say that the Fossil Free for Health Coalition, of which there are many members in this room, we have members who are working on this, and we are currently applying to funding and seeking funding to be able to support more health professionals to do that important calculation and communication work. So if you would like to fund us, come talk to me. And I know I don't want to keep people from food, but I thought we had two people simultaneously ask this question. And anyone on my team, you can cut me off. No one has answered my WhatsApp question if I should end this. What the question is about the general strike, and there were two folks who asked why wait till 2028? Why not 2026? And I want to give you a chance to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, y'all, if you think we can, if you think that you can organize us to a general strike in 2026, like, be my guest. Yeah, generally the like strategic reason for saying 2028 is we think that that is like the ambitious but realistic timeline that makes sense with like where we are at right now, and being really real with ourselves that like we don't have the base to be able to successfully call for a general strike tomorrow. And I don't think that we'll have it by 2026. And because like the UAW and other unions have aligned to 2028, we think that that is our best shot at like causing society-wide disruption. And again, want to emphasize the vision is that there are student strikes in 2026 and 2027 that start to build towards that. So it's not like, oh, we're waiting until 2028 to do anything or win anything. We're going to be building power, running local campaigns, running state campaigns, trying to get some federal wins along the way. So like 2028 is the culmination of many years of campaigning and base building. It's not the thing that we're waiting to do. And also, I think there's a world where we get to 2026 and we're like, you know what, we're ready, and we call a shot. But right now, the vision is 2028.
Thank you so much, Adah, for giving us some insight on that. And yeah, for the leadership of all of your organizations, I know we do have a tight schedule the rest of the day, and I know a couple of y'all have to head and get on flights and trains to go back. And I just want to thank you so much. Maybe if you're able to come up after and like, intercede, you can ask a couple more questions, but we will pass all of the questions you asked on to our speakers. And I know all of them are excited to make connections with you. So let's give it up for them. Big round of applause.